In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where civilizations rise and fall like distant stars, there exists a truth that few dare to acknowledge. Some species are born to be predators, while others are destined to be prey. For millennia, the Zephyrian Empire had stood as the undisputed apex predator of known space. We were the nightmare that haunted the dreams of lesser species, the shadow that fell across worlds before they were consumed by our might. Fear was something we inflicted, never something we experienced. Our very biology rejected the concept, until the day we encountered a species so terrifyingly effective at warfare that even we, the masters of death itself, learned what it meant to be afraid. Commander Vexhai stood motionless on the observation deck of the dreadnought Eternal Dominion, his 6 eyes scanning the tactical displays with the cold precision that had made him the most feared military leader in Zephyrian space. The phosphorescent scales along his elongated skull pulsed with a dim blue light, a biological indicator of his complete emotional control. In his 3 centuries of existence, Vexhai had never known defeat, never experienced doubt, and certainly never felt the primitive emotion that lesser species called fear. The Zephyrian Empire had spent the last 5,000 years expanding across the galaxy, consuming worlds and civilizations with methodical efficiency. Their philosophy was simple: the strong devour the weak, and the Zephyrians were the strongest. Standing nearly 12 feet tall, with 4 arms ending in razor-sharp claws, natural armor plating, and reflexes that could track a photon beam, they were evolution's perfect warriors. Their technology reflected their nature: weapons designed not just to kill, but to terrorize, ships built to inspire despair in any who witnessed their approach. "Report," Vexhai commanded, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the ship's hull. The bridge crew, each a seasoned veteran of countless campaigns, moved with silent efficiency. They had learned long ago that their commander's patience was as limited as his mercy. Sub-Commander Kreltak, a younger Zephyrian whose scales still carried the bright green hue of recent maturity, approached with visible nervousness. "Sir, our advanced scouts have completed their reconnaissance of the Sol system. The 3rd planet, designated Terra by its inhabitants, shows signs of a primitive civilization. Estimated technological level suggests they have barely achieved rudimentary spaceflight." Vexhai's mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his species. Another backwater world, another easy conquest. The galaxy seemed filled with these pathetic creatures who had barely managed to crawl out of their planetary cradles before the Zephyrians found them. Most surrendered immediately upon seeing a single Zephyrian vessel. Those that didn't were usually reduced to ash within hours. "Population estimates?" he inquired, already calculating resource allocation for the harvesting operations that would follow. "Approximately 8 billion sentient beings, sir. They call themselves humans. Scans indicate they are bipedal, oxygen-breathing mammals, with no natural weapons or armor. Average height approximately 6 feet, with only 2 arms, and limited physical capabilities. Their space-based infrastructure is laughably primitive. A few orbital stations and some rudimentary settlements on their moon and neighboring planets." Vexhai turned his attention to the holographic display showing the Sol system. It was unremarkable in every way: a single yellow star with a handful of planets, most of them barren rocks unsuitable for habitation. The 3rd planet, this Terra, appeared to be a typical garden world with abundant water and a nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere, perfect for Zephyrian colonization once the current inhabitants were dealt with. "Any signs of organized military resistance?" "Minimal, sir. They possess crude kinetic weapons, some basic energy systems, and what appears to be primitive nuclear technology. Their largest space vessels are barely a tenth the size of our smallest fighters. Intelligence suggests they are currently divided into numerous competing nation-states, constantly engaged in small-scale conflicts among themselves." Krelthak paused, consulting his datapad. "There is one anomaly, however." Vexhai's eyes narrowed. In his experience, anomalies were either irrelevant curiosities or potential complications. "Elaborate." "Their military history is extensive, sir. For a species that has only existed in recorded history for approximately 10,000 years, they have engaged in warfare at an unprecedented scale and frequency. Their conflicts have grown progressively more sophisticated and devastating. The data suggests they have been in a near constant state of warfare throughout their entire civilizational development." "Irrelevant," Vexhai dismissed with a wave of his upper right arm. "Primitive warfare between primitive beings. Many species fight among themselves before they encounter superior forces. It makes them weak, divided." He had seen it countless times before. civilizations so busy destroying themselves that they offered no meaningful resistance to Zephyrian conquest. But Krelthak's scales had taken on a deeper shade of green, indicating continued anxiety. Sir, with respect, the scale of their conflicts is unlike anything in our databases. In just the last century of their development, they engaged in 2 global wars involving hundreds of millions of combatants. Their weapons technology advanced from simple chemical propellants to thermonuclear devices capable of destroying entire cities in less than 50 years. They have demonstrated a capacity for industrial mobilization that exceeds most spacefaring civilizations. Vexhai considered this information with the detached interest of a scientist examining an unusual specimen. Rapid technological advancement was not uncommon among primitive species when faced with extinction-level threats. It was actually quite predictable. What mattered was their current capability, which by all accounts was pathetically inadequate. "Sir," the communications officer interrupted, "we are receiving a transmission from the Advanced Reconnaissance Fleet."
On screen, the holographic display shifted to show Captain Yithmore, commander of the scouting force.
The veteran warrior's usual composed demeanor seemed slightly strained, his scales flickering with an odd pattern that Vexhai had never seen before. "Commander Vexhai," Yithmore began, his voice carrying an unusual tension. "We have completed our covert observation of human military capabilities. I am uploading the full tactical analysis now, but there are certain aspects of their behavior that I felt required immediate attention." "Proceed with your report, Captain." "Sir, while their technology is indeed primitive by our standards, their approach to warfare is unique. We observed several of their military training facilities and recorded numerous historical conflicts through their communication networks. These humans do not fight like any species we have encountered before." Vexhai's patience was wearing thin. "Captain, you are speaking in generalities. Provide specific tactical assessments." Yithmore's scales darkened slightly. "Sir, they appear to have developed warfare into something approaching an art form. Their strategic thinking is highly adaptive and creative. More concerning is their apparent psychological profile in combat situations. Most species, when faced with overwhelming odds, demonstrate predictable behavioral patterns: flight, surrender, or panic-induced aggression. Humans seem to exhibit none of these responses." Explain. "We accessed their historical records, sir. During what they call their Second World War, a human military unit was surrounded and vastly outnumbered by enemy forces. When offered terms of surrender, their commanding officer's response was simply, 'Nuts.' They then proceeded to hold their position against impossible odds until reinforcements arrived." This was not an isolated incident, sir. Their history is filled with such examples of refusing to yield, even when defeat appears certain. Vexhai remained silent, processing this information. Stubborn resistance was not unusual among primitive species. Most could be broken through sufficient application of force. "There is more, sir. We observed their current military exercises. They have developed a concept they call combined arms warfare that integrates multiple weapon systems and tactical approaches with remarkable efficiency. Their soldiers are trained to continue fighting even when cut off from command structures, even when wounded, even when facing certain death. They have institutionalized what they call never leave a soldier behind. They will risk entire units to retrieve even a single fallen comrade." This information was more concerning. Species that prioritized individual survival above group success were easier to break through targeted pressure, but a species that valued group cohesion above individual survival could be far more difficult to defeat quickly. "Most disturbing, sir," Yithmore continued, "is their reaction to being observed. We detected no evidence that they are aware of our presence, yet several of their military leaders have recently begun advocating for increased space-based defensive capabilities." One of their leaders stated, and I quote, "We must prepare for the possibility that we are not alone in the universe, and that whatever else is out there might not have our best interests at heart." Vexhai felt an unfamiliar sensation, a tiny flutter of something he could not immediately identify. It was quickly suppressed. Paranoid speculation by primitive minds. "Are you suggesting that a species that cannot even achieve faster-than-light travel poses a threat to the Zephyrian Empire?" "No, sir, of course not. But I recommend we approach this conquest with more caution than usual. Perhaps a demonstration of force to encourage immediate surrender rather than a prolonged campaign." Vexhai considered the suggestion. Standard Zephyrian doctrine called for overwhelming initial strikes to shatter enemy morale, followed by systematic occupation. It was a proven strategy that had worked on hundreds of worlds. There was no reason to deviate from it now. "Captain, you and your fleet will continue monitoring human activities. The main battle fleet will arrive in 3 days to begin preliminary bombardment of their major population centers. Once they understand the futility of resistance, we will proceed with standard occupation protocols. Understood, sir. The transmission ended, leaving Vexai alone with his thoughts. 3 days to prepare for what should be a routine conquest. Yet something about Yithmor's report nagged at him. In all his campaigns, he had never encountered a species that appeared to welcome conflict rather than avoid it. Most civilizations develop space travel as a means of expanding their reach peacefully, exploring and colonizing new worlds. These humans seem to have developed every technology as a potential weapon, every advancement as a tool for more effective warfare. He called up the detailed analysis from the reconnaissance team. The more he read, the more puzzled he became. Human civilization was a study in contradictions. They had created art and music of extraordinary beauty, developed philosophies of peace and cooperation, built magnificent cities and monuments. Yet underneath this cultural development lay an infrastructure entirely oriented toward conflict. Their governments maintained massive military organizations even during peacetime. Their economic systems were geared toward rapid conversion to wartime production. Their entertainment media was filled with stories of heroic last stands against impossible odds. Most alien about them was their relationship with death in combat. Where most species viewed military service as an unfortunate necessity, humans seemed to have developed an entire mythology around warriors dying gloriously in battle. They had concepts like honor in death and better to die on your feet than live on your knees that suggested a fundamental comfort with violence that even Zephyrians found unusual. Vexai dismissed these concerns with the practiced ease of a veteran commander. Primitive psychology was irrelevant when faced with superior firepower. The Zephyrian Empire had not conquered half the galaxy by worrying about the emotional states of their enemies. 3 days from now, terror would be another footnote in their vast catalogue of victories. But deep in his subconscious mind, in neural pathways that had never been activated in 3 centuries of existence, something stirred. Something that had no name in the Zephyrian language, something that would soon become terrifyingly familiar. For the first time in his life, Commander Vexai was beginning to experience the faint stirrings of doubt. The next 3 days passed with routine efficiency. Battle plans were finalized, weapon systems were calibrated, and the vast machinery of Zephyrian conquest prepared to grind another primitive civilization into dust. The fleet that approached the Sol system was a testament to military might. 200 vessels ranging from massive dreadnoughts capable of cracking planets to agile fighters designed for atmospheric combat. It was enough firepower to sterilize a dozen worlds. As they reached the edge of the solar system, Vexai expected to see the humans' primitive sensors detecting their approach. He anticipated panic, desperate attempts at communication, perhaps even a few futile attacks by their laughably inadequate spacecraft. What he found instead was silence. The human homeworld continued its rotation as if nothing had changed. Their communication networks showed no signs of alarm. Their military forces remained at normal readiness levels. It was as if they were completely unaware that the most powerful military force in the galaxy had just entered their star system. "Sir," the sensor officer reported, "we are detecting no change in human behavior patterns. Their space traffic continues normally. Their orbital installations show no signs of increased activity, and their military communications remain routine." Vexai studied the tactical displays with growing confusion. Either these humans possessed stealth technology far beyond what their development level suggested, or they truly had not detected the approach of 200 Zephyrian warships. Both possibilities seemed equally unlikely. "Begin long-range scanning of their defensive installations. I want a complete tactical picture before we announce our presence." What the scans revealed was even more puzzling. The humans had indeed been busy in the 3 days since the reconnaissance report, but instead of preparing defenses or attempting to hide, they had actually increased their military activities. New satellites had been deployed, additional spacecraft had been launched, and ground-based installations had been activated. It was as if they were preparing for something, but not for invasion. Communications: open a channel to Terra. Standard conquest protocol. The transmission array activated, sending a message in multiple human languages simultaneously. The message was simple and had been refined over centuries of use. Surrender immediately and be incorporated into the Empire peacefully, or resist and be destroyed utterly. The response came within minutes, but it was not what anyone aboard the Zephyrian fleet expected. A single human face appeared on the main screen, middle-aged, unremarkable by human standards, wearing what appeared to be a simple uniform. When he spoke, his voice was calm and measured, with no trace of the fear or desperation that usually characterized first contact with a superior force. To the commanding officer of the approaching fleet, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. We have been aware of your presence since you entered our star system. We have also been aware of your reconnaissance activities for the past several months. We would like to propose an alternative to the standard conquest scenario you have just described. Vexai felt that strange flutter again, stronger this time. They had known. Somehow, impossibly, they had known and had been watching. You will surrender immediately or face the full might of the Zephyrian Empire. Admiral Chen's expression did not change. With respect, Commander, we believe you may be operating under some misconceptions about human capabilities. While we acknowledge that your technology is superior to ours in many ways, we do not believe that superiority is as absolute as you may think. We would like to propose a demonstration. A demonstration? Yes. We propose that a small force from your fleet engage a small force from ours in limited combat. If we are defeated quickly and decisively, we will surrender immediately. If we prove capable of meaningful resistance, perhaps we can discuss terms for coexistence rather than conquest. The audacity of the proposal was breathtaking. A primitive species that had just learned they were facing the most powerful military force in the galaxy was suggesting a test of combat prowess. It was like an insect challenging a predator to single combat. You are in no position to propose anything, Vexay replied. You will surrender now or be destroyed. Admiral Chen smiled, and for reasons he could not articulate, Vexay found the expression deeply unsettling. Commander, with the greatest respect, we are not going to surrender. We never surrender. It's not who we are, so your choice is simple. You can begin your invasion and learn about human warfare the hard way, or you can accept our demonstration and perhaps learn something valuable with minimal loss of life on both sides. Vexay was silent for long moments, studying the human's face. There was no fear there, no desperation, no pleading. Instead, he saw something he had never encountered before in a primitive species. Absolute confidence. Not the confidence of ignorance, but the confidence of someone who knows exactly what they are capable of and is entirely comfortable with the consequences. Very well, he finally said. One squadron of fighters against whatever force you wish to deploy. When your ships are reduced to debris, you will surrender unconditionally. Agreed, Admiral Chen replied immediately. We will deploy one ship. One ship? One ship. Our newest heavy cruiser, the UES Indomitable. She'll meet your squadron at coordinates we're transmitting now. Fair warning, Commander. This isn't going to go the way you think it will. The transmission ended, leaving the Zephyrian bridge in stunned silence. One ship against 12 of their most advanced fighters. It was beyond suicidal. It was incomprehensible. But as Vexai gave the orders to deploy his squadron, he found himself wondering about that smile. And for the first time in 3 centuries, he began to understand what fear felt like. The designated coordinates hung in space like a void waiting to be filled with violence. Commander Vexay watched the tactical display as Squadron Leader Korthvex positioned his 12 fighters in perfect formation. Each vessel represented the pinnacle of Zephyrian military engineering. Sleek, deadly craft capable of reducing small moons to asteroids. Korthvex himself was one of the Empire's finest pilots, with over 200 confirmed kills across 50 different worlds. Long-range sensors detect the approaching human vessel, reported the sensor officer, his voice carrying a note of confusion. Sir, the readings are unusual. Vexay's attention sharpened. Explain. The ship is larger than expected for what they called a heavy cruiser, approximately 800 meters in length, but the mass readings suggest extremely dense construction. The hull appears to be composed of some kind of composite armor we haven't encountered before, and sir, the officer paused, double-checking his instruments. The energy signatures are inconsistent with their observed technology level. On the main screen, the UES Indomitable emerged from behind one of Terra's moons. Even at extreme range, the ship was impressive in a way that surprised Vexai. Where most human vessels they had observed were sleek and utilitarian, this craft looked like it had been designed by someone who understood that warfare was as much about psychological impact as firepower. Its hull was angular and aggressive, studded with weapon emplacements that seemed to cover every conceivable firing angle. But more unsettling was its movement pattern. Most ships, when approaching a combat scenario, moved with careful precision, conserving energy and maintaining optimal positioning for either engagement or retreat. The Indomitable moved like a predator stalking prey. Its course changes fluid and unpredictable, as if its captain was already planning 3 moves ahead. Squadron Leader Korthvex reports ready for engagement, the communications officer announced. Vex High opened a channel to his fighters. You are facing a single primitive vessel. Make it quick and clean. Demonstrate Zephyrian superiority. Understood, Commander. Beginning attack run. The 12 fighters broke formation and approached the human vessel in a classic envelopment pattern. It was a maneuver that had worked on countless species. Overwhelming firepower from multiple directions, making defense impossible and escape unlikely. Korthvex had used this same tactic to destroy entire enemy fleets. But as the Zephyrian fighters closed to weapons range, something unexpected happened. Instead of attempting to evade or taking a defensive position, the Indomitable accelerated directly toward the center of the attacking formation. Its engines blazed with an intensity that suggested massive power reserves, and its trajectory indicated a willingness to engage in close-quarters combat that bordered on insanity. Sir, the sensor officer called out, his voice now definitely concerned. The human vessel is maneuvering in patterns that exceed their supposed technological capabilities. Their acceleration rates and power output are far beyond what our intelligence suggested. Before Vexhai could respond, the space around the engagement zone erupted in violence, but it was not the quick, decisive destruction he had expected. Instead, he witnessed something that challenged everything he understood about primitive warfare. The Indomitable opened fire as soon as the Zephyrian fighters entered extreme range, but its weapons were unlike anything in their databases. Instead of the crude kinetic projectiles or basic energy weapons they had observed in human military exercises, the ship deployed a coordinated barrage of advanced particle beams, guided missiles with impossibly sophisticated tracking systems, and what appeared to be some kind of electromagnetic pulse weapon that temporarily disrupted Zephyrian shields. More shocking than the weapons themselves was how they were employed. Most species, when outnumbered 12-1, would attempt to engage at maximum range, picking off attackers one by one while maintaining distance. The human ship did the opposite. It dove straight into the fighter formation, using its superior size and armor to ram through their formation while unleashing devastating close-range fire. Impossible, Vexhay muttered, watching as one of his fighters simply vanished in a brilliant explosion. The Indomitable had somehow predicted the fighter's evasive maneuver and fired where it was going to be rather than where it was. Squadron Leader Korthvex's voice crackled over the communication system, strained with something Vexahai had never heard from him before. Uncertainty. Command. This ship is not fighting like any primitive vessel should. It's anticipating our maneuvers, compensating for our technology advantages, and its pilot appears to be enjoying this. Indeed, as Vexay watched the engagement, he began to realize that the human ship was not simply defending itself, it was hunting. Every maneuver seemed designed not just to avoid destruction, but to position itself for maximum damage to his fighters. The Indomitable moved through space like a dancer, graceful and deadly, turning what should have been its funeral into a performance of controlled violence. Another Zephyrian fighter exploded, then a third. Each loss was preceded by tactical errors that his pilots never made, except they weren't really errors. They were forced mistakes created by a human commander who somehow understood Zephyrian tactical doctrine better than some of his own officers. How? Vexhay demanded. Of no one in particular. How does a primitive species know our combat protocols? The answer came not from his own crew, but from the enemy. The Indomitable's communication array activated, and Admiral Chen's voice filled the Zephyrian bridge. Commander Vexhay, I thought you might be interested to know that we've been studying Zephyrian military tactics for quite some time. Your species' approach to warfare is very systematic, very predictable. You've become comfortable with your superiority, and comfort breeds complacency. We, on the other hand, have spent our entire existence fighting enemies who were stronger, faster, or better armed than us. We've learned to win through adaptation, creativity, and sheer stubborn refusal to give up. A fourth fighter vanished from the tactical display, its destruction so sudden that the sensors barely registered what had happened. You see, Admiral Chen continued, her voice conversational despite the violence occurring around her ship, you've made the same mistake that many of our enemies have made throughout human history. You assumed that technological superiority automatically translates to tactical superiority. You assumed that because we're primitive by your standards, we're also stupid. And you assumed that because we lack your natural advantages, we lack the will to fight. The Indomitable rolled inverted and unleashed a spread of missiles that somehow curved around the evasive maneuvers of two more fighters, striking them simultaneously. The human ship's shields flared under return fire but held firm, and Vexai realized with growing horror that his fighters were being outmatched not by superior technology, but by superior tactics. All assumptions prove correct until they prove fatal, Admiral Chen added. And for your pilots, I'm afraid that moment has arrived. What happened next would haunt Vexai's dreams for the rest of his life. The remaining 6 fighters, recognizing that their standard tactics were failing, attempted to withdraw to long range, where their speed advantages would allow them to overwhelm the human ship with sustained fire. It was a reasonable adaptation to an unexpected situation. But the Indomitable had anticipated this maneuver as well. As the fighters attempted to disengage, the human ship deployed what appeared to be some kind of area denial weapon. A network of energy fields that created corridors of space where movement was possible and areas where it was not. The Zephyrian pilots found themselves forced into predictable flight paths, and the human ship used those predictable paths to destroy them with surgical precision. One by one, the remaining fighters fell. Not to overwhelming firepower or superior technology, but to tactical brilliance that turned their own advantages against them. By the time the engagement ended, 12 of the Empire's finest fighters had been reduced to glowing debris, while the UES Indomitable remained largely intact, its shields regenerating and its weapons still fully operational. The bridge of the Eternal Dominion was silent, except for the soft hum of life support systems. Every officer stared at their displays as if the readings might change if they looked hard enough. Squadron Leader Korthvex was dead. 12 irreplaceable fighters were gone. And a single primitive human vessel was requesting permission to dock. Commander, Admiral Chen's voice had lost none of its calm confidence. I believe this concludes our demonstration. As agreed, we have proven capable of meaningful resistance. Would you like to discuss terms for coexistence? Or shall we proceed to the full invasion where you discovered just how much we've been holding back? Vexai found himself unable to speak. In 3 centuries of military service, he had never lost a single engagement. He had never even considered the possibility of losing an engagement. The concept simply did not exist in his mental framework. Yet he had just witnessed the impossible. A primitive species not only defeating his forces, but doing so with an elegance that suggested the engagement had been something approaching sport for them. How? He finally managed. How what, Commander? How did you know our tactics? How did you develop countermeasures? How did you fight a battle against superior technology and win? There was a pause before Admiral Chen responded, and when she did, Vexai could hear something in her voice that chilled him to his core. Not anger, not hatred, not even satisfaction at victory. What he heard was pity. Commander, you've been fighting the same kind of war for 5,000 years. You encounter a primitive species, you overwhelm them with superior technology, they surrender or die. It's efficient, but it's made you predictable. We, on the other hand, have been fighting each other for our entire history. We've faced enemies with better equipment, better training, better positions, and better numbers. We've learned to win anyway. The tactical display showed the Indomitable maintaining position near the debris field that had once been his squadron. The human ship seemed to be waiting, but for what, Vexai could not imagine. Your species fights like apex predators, Admiral Chen continued. You're used to being the strongest thing in the room, so you've developed tactics that rely on that strength. Humans fight like persistence hunters. We don't have to be stronger or faster or better armed. We just have to be smarter, more adaptable, and more determined than whatever we're hunting. And Commander, we've been hunting things much more dangerous than us for a very long time. Vexai realized that his hands were trembling. The sensation was so alien that for a moment he wondered if he was experiencing some kind of system failure. Then the truth hit him with the force of a physical blow. He was afraid. For the first time in his existence, he was experiencing genuine, bone-deep fear. What do you want? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. What we've always wanted, to be left alone to develop in peace. We're not interested in conquest, Commander. We're not interested in your empire or your territory or your resources. We just want you to go away and never come back. In exchange, we'll pretend this conversation never happened. And if I refuse, then you'll discover what happens when humans stop playing defense and start playing offense. You'll learn what it means to fight a species that has turned warfare into an art form, that treats impossible odds as motivation rather than deterrent, and that has a very simple philosophy about enemies who threaten their home world. Which is... Admiral Chen's smile was visible in her voice. We don't just defeat our enemies, Commander, we make sure they can never threaten anyone ever again. We call it total war, and it's what we do to species that refuse to leave us alone. The communication ended, leaving Vexhai alone with his thoughts and a new understanding of his place in the universe. For the first time in Zephyrian history, they had encountered a species that was not impressed by their reputation, not intimidated by their technology, and not willing to submit to their rule. But more than that, he had encountered a species that seemed to view the Zephyrian Empire not as an unstoppable force of nature, but as a problem to be solved. And if there was one thing that human history had taught him during his review of their military records, it was that humans were very, very good at solving problems. The fleet held position for 3 hours, while Vexhai wrestled with a decision that would define not just his career, but possibly the future of his entire civilization. He could order the full invasion to proceed, throwing the entire battle fleet against whatever defenses these humans had prepared. Given their demonstrated capabilities, it would likely be a costly victory, but it would still be a victory. Or he could accept their terms and withdraw, marking the first time in recorded history that the Zephyrian Empire had retreated from a primitive world. The choice, when it came, was surprisingly easy. Because buried in the tactical analysis of the engagement, hidden among the sensor readings and weapon signatures, was a detail that his officers had missed but that Vexhai's experienced eye had caught. The Indomitable had not been fighting at full capacity. Its power output readings suggested that it had been using perhaps 60% of its available systems. The humans had been holding back. They had destroyed 12 Zephyrian fighters while barely exerting themselves, and if Admiral Chen was telling the truth about their approach to warfare, then somewhere in this system were defenses that would make the Indomitable look like a training vessel. For the second time in his life, Vexhai found himself experiencing an emotion that had no name in his language. Later, he would learn that humans called it wisdom, the ability to recognize when a battle could not be won, regardless of the cost one was willing to pay. Communications, he said finally. Signal the fleet. We are withdrawing from this system. Sir? Sub-Commander Krelthak looked at him with complete bewilderment. Are we retreating? No, Vexhai replied, his voice steady despite the turmoil in his mind. We are choosing to survive. As the Zephyrian fleet began its withdrawal from the Sol system, Vexhai stood once more on the observation deck, watching as terror grew smaller in the distance. Somewhere on that blue-green world, 8 billion humans were going about their daily lives, probably unaware that they had just accomplished something that no other species in recorded galactic history had managed. They had made the Zephyrian Empire back down. But what truly terrified Vexhai, what would give him nightmares for the rest of his life, was the realization that this encounter had been a test. The humans had not been defending their world, they had been evaluating their enemy. They had wanted to see what the Zephyrians were capable of, what their tactics were, how they thought and fought. And now they knew. As his fleet entered hyperspace and began the long journey back to Zephyrian territory, Vexhai wondered what humanity would do with that knowledge. He had a feeling he would find out sooner than he wanted to. 6 months had passed since the Zephyrian Empire's withdrawal from the Sol system, and Commander Vexhai had hoped that time and distance would help him forget the humiliation of that encounter. Instead, the opposite had occurred. The more he analyzed what had happened, the more disturbed he became. The humans had not simply defeated his forces, they had done so with a casualness that suggested they had been experimenting rather than fighting for their lives. Sleep had become elusive. For a species that typically required only 4 hours of rest per cycle, Vexhai found himself lying awake for entire nights, replaying the engagement over and over in his mind. Each analysis revealed new details that he had missed initially, subtle tactical choices that demonstrated a level of military sophistication that should have been impossible for a species that had never faced an external threat. The official report to High Command had been carefully worded. Strategic withdrawal due to unexpectedly effective planetary defenses. Recommend future evaluation before engagement. It was technically accurate while avoiding the politically catastrophic truth that the Empire's finest military commander had been outmaneuvered by primitive aliens, that the universe has a way of refusing to let uncomfortable truths remain buried. The first sign of trouble came from the Kepler 442 system, where a Zephyrian mining operation had been extracting rare metals from several uninhabited worlds. The facility went silent without warning, its automated distress beacon never activating. When a patrol ship investigated, they found something that defied explanation. The mining stations were gone, not destroyed, gone. The massive orbital platforms that had taken months to construct had been dismantled with surgical precision. Every piece of Zephyrian technology had been removed, while the planets themselves remained completely undamaged. It was as if someone had performed careful surgery on the solar system, removing only the invasive elements. More troubling were the messages left behind. Written in perfect Zephyrian script across the surface of the largest moon were 4 words: "Consider this a warning." The second incident occurred 3 weeks later in the Tau Ceti system, where a small Zephyrian colony had been established on a garden world. This time, there were survivors to tell the tale, and their account sent shockwaves through the Empire's military hierarchy. The colonists reported that their sensors had detected approaching ships, but the vessels had not appeared on any visual displays. When the colony's defense systems activated, they had simply stopped working. Not destroyed, not damaged. They had been remotely shut down by someone who apparently understood Zephyrian technology better than the Zephyrians themselves. Then the ships had decloaked, revealing sleek vessels that bore no resemblance to anything in the Imperial database. The craft were clearly of human design, but their capabilities suggested technological advancement that should have taken centuries to achieve. The humans had not attacked. Instead, they had established orbit around the colony and opened communications. The message was simple and delivered by Admiral Chen herself. This world is now under human protection. You have 24 hours to evacuate. Any Zephyrian vessels that return to this system will be destroyed without warning. The colonists had evacuated within 12 hours. By the time the third incident was reported, Vexay knew what he was looking at. The humans were not randomly attacking Zephyrian outposts. They were conducting a systematic campaign to push the Empire back from their expanding sphere of influence. And they were doing so with a precision that suggested detailed knowledge of every Zephyrian installation within 50 light-years of their home system. The pattern was becoming clear. Humans did not fight like any other species the Empire had encountered. They did not seek to conquer territory or destroy enemies. Instead, they seemed focused on creating a buffer zone around their space, methodically removing any potential threat before it could develop into an actual problem. It was strategic thinking on a scale that stretched across decades or even centuries. High Command finally summoned Vexhai to explain the situation. The meeting took place on Zephyr Prime, the Empire's capital world, in a chamber designed to intimidate visiting dignitaries from lesser species. Every surface was decorated with trophies from conquered worlds, weapons from defeated enemies, and monuments to Zephyrian military supremacy. General Morthak, Supreme Commander of all Imperial forces, listened to Vexay's report in silence. The ancient warrior's scales had long since turned the deep purple of advanced age, and his 4 eyes held the calculating intelligence that had made him the most successful military leader in Zephyrian history. "You were telling me," Morthak said when the briefing concluded, "that a species we had classified as primitive has somehow developed advanced stealth technology, superior tactical doctrine, and the capability to defeat our forces without sustaining meaningful casualties." "That is correct, sir. And you believe this technological leap occurred in the 6 months since our withdrawal from their system?" Vexay hesitated. This was the conclusion he had been avoiding, but the evidence made it inescapable. "No, sir. I believe they possessed these capabilities during our initial encounter. They deliberately concealed their true technological level to assess our own capabilities." The chamber fell silent. Around the massive table, the Empire's top military leaders absorbed the implications of this statement. If Vexay was correct, then humanity had allowed them to observe what they thought was a primitive civilization, while secretly studying Zephyrian technology and tactics. "Impossible," declared Admiral Kreshtar, the Empire's chief of naval operations. "No species develops advanced military technology without extensive space-based infrastructure. Our reconnaissance showed no evidence of major industrial capability. Unless," Vexay replied quietly, "they deliberately concealed it. Our scouts observed only what the humans wanted them to observe." General Morthak activated the chamber's holographic display, showing a tactical map of the galaxy. Zephyrian territory stretched across thousands of systems, a vast empire that had taken millennia to establish. But now, for the first time, that territory was shrinking. "Show me the pattern of attacks." Vexay uploaded his analysis to the display. Red markers appeared across the map, each indicating a human intervention. The pattern was immediately obvious to any trained strategist. The humans were not attacking randomly. They were systematically clearing a corridor of space that stretched from their home system toward the galactic core. "They are not simply defending themselves," Morthak observed. "They are preparing for expansion." "Yes, sir. And if their current rate of technological advancement continues, they will possess capabilities that exceed our own within a matter of years rather than decades." The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. For 5,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire had grown through systematic conquest, secure in the knowledge that their technological superiority made them unbeatable. Now they faced a species that seemed capable of matching their technological advancement while possessing tactical creativity that exceeded their own. "What do you recommend?" Morthak asked. Vexhair had been dreading this question. Military doctrine was clear. When facing a growing threat, the solution was to eliminate it before it became unmanageable. But every analysis suggested that humanity was already past the point where traditional conquest strategies would work. "Sir, I believe we have two options. We can attempt a full-scale assault on human space with the entire Imperial fleet, or we can negotiate a formal treaty establishing boundaries between our territories."
Negotiate? Admiral Kreshtar's voice carried the disdain that the concept deserved.
"The Zephyrian Empire does not negotiate with primitives. With respect, Admiral, they are no longer primitives. And if we continue to treat them as such, we risk discovering just how far beyond us they have actually advanced." General Morthak studied the tactical display for several minutes before speaking. "Commander Vexai, you will return to the human system with a full battle fleet. If they possess the capabilities you suggest, then we must determine their true extent. If they do not, then we will proceed with standard conquest protocols." "Sir, respectfully, I believe that would be a mistake. If we approach their territory with aggressive intent, they will view it as a declaration of war. And based on what I observed during our previous encounter, humans approach warfare very differently than we do." "Explain." Vex High called up recordings from his analysis of human military history. "Sir, when most species face an existential threat, they focus on defense. They build stronger fortifications, larger fleets, more powerful weapons. Humans do the opposite. When faced with a threat to their existence, they don't just defend. They ensure that the threat can never threaten them again by completely destroying it." The recordings showed human conflicts throughout their history. Time and time again, when pushed to the edge of defeat, humans had responded not with surrender or negotiation, but with escalation that bordered on the suicidal. They had developed weapons capable of destroying their own world rather than allow it to be conquered. They had fought wars that cost millions of lives rather than submit to foreign rule. "They call it total war," Bexhai continued. "The complete mobilization of their entire civilization for the purpose of utterly destroying their enemy. And sir, if we force them into that mindset, I do not believe the Empire will survive the encounter." The chamber erupted in angry voices. The concept that the mighty Zephyrian Empire could be threatened by a single planet was beyond the ability of most officers to accept. But General Mortak raised one clawed hand, and silence immediately returned. "You are suggesting that we abandon our expansion in that direction. I am suggesting that we establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity and negotiate a mutual non-aggression pact. They have made it clear that they are not interested in conquest. They simply want to be left alone to develop in peace. And if they decide that development includes expanding into our territory?" Vexhay had been hoping to avoid this topic, but the question demanded an honest answer. "Sir, based on their rate of technological advancement and their approach to military strategy, I believe that if humanity ever decides the Zephyrian Empire represents a threat to their long-term survival, they will not stop until our civilization is extinct." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. For the first time in recorded history, the Zephyrian Empire's military leadership was contemplating the possibility of their own defeat. Admiral Kreshtar broke the silence. "You are asking us to base strategic policy on speculation and fear." "No, sir. I am asking us to base strategic policy on observed capabilities and demonstrated intentions. The humans have shown us what they can do. They have also shown us that they prefer negotiation to violence when possible. But they have made it equally clear that they are fully prepared for violence if negotiation fails." General Morthak deactivated the holographic display and turned to face the assembled officers. "Very well. Commander Vexai, you will return to the human system, but not with a battle fleet. You will take a single ship flying under a diplomatic flag. You will establish formal contact with their government and determine their terms for peaceful coexistence. Sir, the High Council will never approve. The High Council will approve what I tell them to approve, and I will tell them that we have encountered a species that represents a new paradigm in galactic warfare, a species that has forced us to reconsider our entire approach to expansion and conquest." Vexay felt a mixture of relief and terror. Relief that wisdom had prevailed over military pride. Terror at what he might discover when he returned to human space. 3 weeks later, the diplomatic vessel Eternal Patience dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. Unlike his previous visit, this time Vexay came alone, flying under universal diplomatic protocols and broadcasting messages of peaceful intent. The response was immediate. Admiral Chen herself appeared on his communication screen, her expression neutral, but her eyes holding a hint of what might have been amusement. Commander Vexay, welcome back to Sol System. I trust your second visit will be more productive than your first. Admiral Chen, I come bearing an offer of formal diplomatic recognition from the Zephyrian Empire. We wish to establish peaceful relations and negotiate appropriate boundaries between our territories. How refreshing. And what changed the Empire's mind about conquest? Vexay considered his answer carefully. Admitting that the Empire was afraid would be politically catastrophic. But lying to these humans seemed equally dangerous. They had already demonstrated an unnerving ability to see through deception. We have come to understand that humanity represents a new type of civilization, one that requires a different approach than we have traditionally employed. Admiral Chen smiled, and this time, Vexay recognized the expression for what it was, the satisfied look of someone whose strategy had worked exactly as planned. Commander, we've been hoping you would reach that conclusion. We've prepared a comprehensive proposal for peaceful coexistence. You'll find it covers territorial boundaries, trade agreements, technology sharing protocols, and mutual defense arrangements. Technology sharing? Of course. You see, Commander, we've been studying your civilization just as carefully as you've been studying ours, and we've identified several areas where cooperation would be mutually beneficial. Your people are excellent engineers, but you've become somewhat rigid in your thinking. We, on the other hand, are very good at creative problem solving, but we lack some of your manufacturing capabilities. Vexay realized that he was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history, a species that viewed the Zephyrian Empire not as a threat to be feared or an enemy to be defeated, but as a potential partner with useful capabilities. There is one condition, Admiral Chen continued. Any formal agreement must include a mutual defense clause, not to protect us from you. We've established that we can handle that situation ourselves, but to protect both our civilizations from external threats. What external threats? Admiral Chen's expression grew serious. Commander, your people have been expanding through this galaxy for 5,000 years, but you've remained in the same local spiral arm. We've been conducting deep space reconnaissance, and there are things out there that make both our species look primitive. Things that we're going to have to face eventually. She activated her ship's holographic display, showing long-range sensor data that stretched far beyond anything the Zephyrians had ever achieved. In the deep void between spiral arms, something vast and ancient was moving. Something that dwarfed both human and Zephyrian civilizations. The galaxy is bigger than either of us realized, Commander. And it's full of things that are older, stronger, and far more dangerous than anything we've encountered so far. When those things arrive in this spiral arm, and they will, we're going to need each other. Vexay stared at the display, feeling fear return in a completely new form. Throughout their history, the Zephyrians had been the apex predator, the most dangerous thing in their corner of space. Now he was learning that they had been nothing more than children playing with toys in a nursery, unaware that there were adults in the universe who could end their games without effort. What do you propose? Partnership, Commander. Your people bring 5,000 years of engineering expertise and military experience. We bring adaptability, creativity, and the kind of tactical thinking that comes from evolving in a universe that's been trying to kill us since we first crawled out of the oceans. Together, we might be able to prepare for what's coming. As Vexay listened to humanity's proposal for alliance, he realized that fear had become a teacher. For the first time in his species' history, they had encountered something that forced them to evolve beyond simple conquest. They had met their equals and learned that the universe was far stranger and more dangerous than they had ever imagined. But they had also learned that they were not alone in facing those dangers. 6 months later, the treaty was signed in a ceremony that took place on a neutral space station constructed jointly by both civilizations. As Vexay watched human and Zephyrian engineers working together on projects that neither species could have accomplished alone, he reflected on how much had changed since his first encounter with humanity. Fear had indeed touched him, but it had not destroyed him. Instead, it had taught him something that no Zephyrian had ever needed to learn before: the value of allies who were strong enough to stand beside you when the universe revealed its true dangers. And in the deep void between the stars, ancient things continued their slow approach toward the spiral arms where young civilizations played at war, unaware that their real test was yet to come. But for the first time in galactic history, two species that had once been enemies were preparing to face that test together. And perhaps, just perhaps, that would make all the difference.